Welcome to Being Human. Today I'm your co-host, Steve Cuss.
I'm your co-host, Lisa Cuss.
Yeah, let's get right into the candle.
Let's do it. We're just going to start out lighting the candle. This is our tangible reminder that God is present and with us in the form of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the three-wick candle. And we are doing this today in the afternoon as we record.
Yeah.
And I love this reminder because it interrupts the day. Just reminds you in every positive interruption that God is near.
I came downstairs this morning and you were downstairs with a candle lit and your Bible open and you were listening to an app.
Yeah, I really like the 24/7 prayer app with Peter Gregg. And it's put out every day. And it's more like a prayer of examine that incorporates both prayer and scripture and gives me incredible questions to think about.
And they're British, so
And some of them have
closer to God, or
one has an African accent and really deep voice.
Yeah.
And each day there's multiple voices in there, so you hear different dialects and different mix. Yeah, it's really cool.
Okay. Well, we're teaching a new tool today, and I thought it'd be fun for you and I to play a game. I'm going to ask, by the way, Lisa's laughing because when I'm doing my workshops, sometimes my game is like highly invasive questions for people.
Yes.
Like my game about name your inner critic. People's like, that doesn't sound like a game, but we're going to play a game.
I think what's crazy, you normally say that it's sweeping the nation.
Yeah, my games are like so popular.
Yeah.
People have already played them before I've gotten to teach them. Yeah. So we're going to play a game where I ask a question and then you're going to answer it and then I'm going to answer it.
Perfect.
And this game has 4 questions, and ideally this would be something that our audience can also be
Do we get a
along.
Prize? That's what I want to know.
I could get a surprise.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to think about that. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, here's the first question. What difference has it made when you first make sure you're okay before walking into a difficult situation?
Yep. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is public speaking, because I get really, really anxious and sometimes paralyzing fear over that. And then have gone through a season where I have just decided to say yes to whatever comes my way with that and assume that's from the Lord. And so I know this past year we were doing a marriage conference at a church, and I knew it was going to be a large church, and I had done the work to prepare. And then driving up, I had not imagined the size of the campus. Like it took a while to drive all the way around to figure out what door to enter in.
It was huge. Yeah,
there was a school there. There's all kinds of things. And so then we get in and immediately I have a flock of people, right? Just putting on headsets and all of the gear. And my heart started pounding and my imposter syndrome comes out. I'm like, what am I doing? And I was able in the moment to recognize it and just say, give me a minute. And I just paused. And I remember just like turning to the Lord and just saying, you said yes, right?
Yeah.
Like I literally said the words to God, and God said, you said yes, now walk in it.
Yeah.
And then from that moment, took a deep breath and was like, let's go. But yes, I needed a reset.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to answer this question as well, but it's amazing the difference it can make when you first make sure you're okay before walking in, or in your case, you could feel it happening, and rather than letting it flood you, you managed it.
Because if my imposter syndrome ends up in the driver's seat of my life, it's going to be a really hard day.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Do you remember the time I was speaking in Nashville at this event, and I discovered right before I went on that the surprise guest was Stephen Curtis Chapman?
I wasn't there, but I laughed so hard.
Yeah, and I texted you. I'm like, you're not going to believe this, but like Stephen Curtis Chapman is my opening act. And it was so funny because they went out to announce me, which no one had heard of me. And they're like, hey, everybody, this guy, Steve Cuss, is going to come and do Managing Leadership Anxiety. But before he comes, and then they get really excited.
And the crowd is like, yay, SC squared.
Yeah.
And you described it as then you like kind of saunter out to very quiet. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. It's me now. Very similar, though. I definitely had to do the work just to show up as myself. Yeah. For me, this question, what difference has it made when you first make sure you're okay before walking into a difficult situation? I think I had to learn this when I was a chaplain, first of all. That was huge for me to realize I don't have to rush in. And the crazy thing is, it actually only takes a minute or two. How long did it take for you with God?
I mean, less than 30 seconds just to do a check. The same for you?
Yeah. Really quick, just breathing, being aware of God, relaxing into God's presence. Is that crazy? Then I can walk into a situation of chaos and be okay.
Yeah. So good.
Okay. So that's the first question for you guys. What a fun game.
I know.
I mean, people are sharing this episode saying, you've got to play this game.
Yep.
Second question. Where have you seen anxiety being caught between any two people?
Okay. So I mean, in my line of work, I see this all the time, whether I'm working with a parent and a teen, whether I'm working with a couple, whether I'm just working with one person, and it's often about something within a relationship. And see it all the time. One of the things that's come up for me again and again and again is text. Anxiety that comes from a text thread.
Right.
And I don't know when I'm going to learn. But what happens is somebody will start actually pulling, well, let me just read it to you. No, that's not what happens. What happens is someone will describe the situation to me and say, and so I said this person said that, and then this person was like yelling at me. Right. And I'm like, what? Where were you? Well, I was at my house, and that person was at your house? No, I mean, it was all on text. And I'm like, what? And I hear it again and again that somebody feels like they were yelled at on text, or they were like rolling their eyes or didn't get it. And all of the reactivity that happens just from assumptions through a text thread, when you can't see somebody's face, you can't hear their tone, and you just fill in the gaps and the unknown. Crazy.
Do you feel like each generation that comes along has a lower threshold for the phrase yelling?
Yes.
I've had a number of like youngsters, can we call them youngsters?
We can call them youngsters.
Who will say, oh man, that person yelled at me. And it's like, they didn't actually raise their voice, but the tone was interpreted. That's kind of,
it has changed.
Yeah. Okay.
What about you?
Yeah. The question is, where have you seen anxiety being caught between any two people? You and I have talked about this a lot, getting your kids out the door for school on time.
Yep.
And we'll get to this as we teach the tool, but it's fascinating. Either it's between me and the kids, or you and the kids, or one of us and one of the kids. Anxiety gets spread and caught in the effort to get a child ready for school in the morning.
Yes.
It's a classic one.
Yeah, classic at all ages, when they can drive on their own and when we have to get them out the door too. Yep.
Right. Okay, third question. When have you found yourself thinking about what someone else is thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, this one happens a lot in parenting for me. I remember, a particular time where one of our kids would be home, and it felt like if he was home and in the kitchen, and then I would come in from work and come into the kitchen, he would immediately leave and go to his basement or to the bedroom. And I'm like, that's weird. And then I started looking for it, and it was like, every time I walk into the space where he is, he leaves. And then I'm just fuming mad, I'm like, he is so mad at me for something, right? He does not want to be around me. I haven't changed anything, but it's him what's going on inside him? Yeah. What could he possibly, and I get really mad. And then I have to do the work because I know in my head, don't make assumptions, Lisa, just roll with it. And I had to do a lot of work to restrain and not come in defensively and say, what's going on? And then the second day, right, this child ended up talking about something that a pretty big thing that was going on at school, and just happened to be leaving whenever I came in. It had absolutely nothing to do with me, but I was spun up for 2 days.
Yeah, this is a really common situation. I think for me and every pastor I've ever talked to, if you ever get a text from a congregant that says, we need to meet, and that's all they say.
Yes.
And what we're getting to, obviously, here in this fabulous game is the assumptions that we make and how anxiety is generated by assumptions. But anytime a congregant says to me, we need to meet, particularly if it's over text, I never think to myself, I bet they want to give a large donation to the church. I'm always thinking to myself, I'm in trouble. And then I end up in their brain trying to figure out what they want. It's crazy. Before we meet, I've already built like a defense or explanation for 8 different scenarios, so I'm not caught off guard. It's really wild.
You know, it's interesting having lived through that with you, is that as soon as you say that, into my mind pops the look on your face when you get a text like that.
Yeah, which is a look of what? What do I look like?
It is, you're not at all present. You're, biting your nails. You're, and like quickly, everything's fast for you. And you are on a mission. So whatever needs to be done quickly, but there's a look of just intensity in your eyes. And usually when I end up asking you, it has something to do. I mean, it's happened several times. Right. It has something to do with that kind of text. And it's like, oh.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't know me when I was an 8-year-old boy, but after you see me get that text, you kind of get an idea what I look like back then.
Yeah.
You kind of revert back to being in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, this game took a sad turn, but it's really a cheerful game. The 4th and final question, when have you noticed someone enter a room and the mood of the room changes?
I mean, a lot. I think I've had a lot of work experiences with that.
Especially like with a boss or something where they have more power.
Yeah, where when a boss walks into the room, like people can be chit-chatting and having fun, and even little mistakes like wouldn't be a big deal. And then if there's a certain mood, you can tell by the loud silence when somebody walks into the room and a heaviness of it, that all the chit-chat has to stop. And then you just anticipate frustration and kind of rigidness coming out. But I've had that experience big time.
Yeah, so you've seen an example where somebody negatively affects the room. I've been in these weird situations where sometimes maybe I'm having lunch with a pastor who's an older generation than me, and he was trained when he went through training that he kind of needs to be the mayor of every room he walks into.
Yes.
He's kind of meant to be the guy that works the room. And so we'll go out to lunch at a restaurant, and before we get to sit down for our lunch, we have to go table by table and greet everybody. But
you didn't know that you were running for an office.
I didn't know I was going to be the lieutenant mayor or whatever.
Right.
But as I noticed that, it's like there's an anxious need to be cheerful at every table that he enters. And then I just noticed, oh man, we just affected every space. What if that particular couple were having a very vulnerable conversation and we just like barge in being the mayor, hey, how's it going? Good to see you kind of thing. So that would be my answer.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for playing the game.
Yeah.
Totally, there's a prize coming. I'm just looking around, figuring out what I can give you. But the reason we're playing this game is we're introducing a new tool today. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Just laughing because when we were most recently at a retreat and you had no prizes, you just grabbed whatever was around for prizes.
Yeah.
So one of them was a watermelon or a used paper towel that you gave to people as prizes. Yeah. And anyway, that's coming back to me.
I took a piece of paper towel and folded it in a custom way for people.
Yeah,
and gave it
custom
away.
Folded paper towel.
Yeah.
People were actually so excited to get it. So today we're talking about the 4 spaces. And this honestly has been really revolutionary for me because it helps to detangle reactivity, anxiety, just to see where it's coming from rather than just this heavy ugh that you can feel. So the 4 spaces are, the first space is the space inside you.
Yep.
Second space, the space between you and another person. Third space, the space inside the other person. Fourth space, the space you observe going on in a group.
Great. That's the 4 spaces. And so we're going to take the rest of the episode and go through one space at a time, because if you can walk into any environment and notice which space is activated, particularly if you can notice when your anxiety and reactivity is activated, it can help. Huge. It's a big deal. Okay, before we get into the 4 spaces, our new tool, we just want to remind you that in this series of episodes, even with my guests, we've been looking at false needs.
Mm-hmm.
So just a quick reminder, we deal with reactivity and chronic anxiety. It's based on false needs that feel real in the moment. And if you can learn to notice and manage it, you can really relax into God's presence. You can deepen your capacity to work with difficult people. You can deepen your relationships. It's a really powerful thing. So for the last 6 or 8 episodes, we've been asking the question, what do you think you need that you don't really need? So we're not asking you to graduate from that question. We're inviting you to integrate that question into this set of tools, which is learning to notice the 4 spaces of anxiety: the space in me, the space between me and the other, the space inside the other, and the space between others. Let's take them one at a time. Let's talk about the space in me. Yeah. Okay. So here's what's interesting about it. I have found that when I am anxious, I am most prone to focus on somebody else, and I'm least likely to pay attention to myself. It's almost like I get disconnected from myself, and I'm either worried about someone else or annoyed at someone, but either way, I'm focused on that person. Yes. So the way I think about it theologically is in Genesis 3, the original sin was hiding and blaming. Adam blamed Eve and hid from God. And I just see what I tend to do is blame in this case is I'm more focused on another person. Why is it so powerful if I can instead pay attention to myself? So when you were about to go public speaking, I remember I got to see this in real time. And this whole tech team swarmed around you with your belt pack and your microphone. And I could see you getting quite anxious. Why is it so helpful to notice what's going on in you instead of paying attention to the people around you?
For me, if I don't pay attention to what's going on inside of me, then I'm not going to be able to stay connected, and I'm not going to be able to be present. And I think with speaking, or really most anything we do with impact, if we're not able to be present to ourselves, I find that I'm not authentically present outside of myself either. Just to calm my own nervous system so I could think, so I could communicate with the people that were around me, wanting to help get things set up so that I could actually see people coming in and see them as human and not as people who are there to judge,
Yeah.
So that I could trust that the message that God had given me was still of value, rather than if my nervous system takes over or imposter syndrome takes over, then I'm questioning any of the prep work that I did as well. It's super important because I think you're able to stay human size, which is good for yourself and also good for others.
Yeah, I love the way you just said that. It really is about noticing when you're connected to yourself and noticing when you're disconnected. I can kind of imagine if you hadn't done that work, you might even be confusing the tech team by apologizing to them. Hey, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Sometimes if we're not managing ourselves, we tend to bleed it out into other people. Mm-hmm. This for me, for sure, was, I think, the counterintuitive, maybe even the number one lesson of chaplaincy. I just assumed when I first started out in chaplaincy that my job was to focus on people in their need. And I was so shocked to discover that I was bringing all my false needs into the room, didn't even know I had them.
Yeah.
Probably most pressingly in chaplaincy, my need to make someone feel better. And because I wasn't aware of that, I was no longer able to actually help them because I was disconnected from my false need, I guess I would say. And so I would give advice. I would read a Bible passage. I would do anything really believing in the moment it was for them and not realizing it was just to settle myself.
Yes.
And then very similar, right? I had to learn to take my own breath prayer and take my own pulse before walking in so I could be connected.
Yeah. So important. Something I've realized even today is one of the, something going on in me, another source is I'm realizing my need to control, and that it's getting in the way of some new areas of leading, especially online. That just came to me today. I'm like, oh my goodness, I think this is a way that I'm trying to control things and anticipate things that I can't possibly do. The beauty is once we can name that and that false need in the space inside of us, in space one, that's something that we can name before the Lord. The work that I do, the things that are going on implicitly in us that we are not aware of, that's not been made known, it drives us blindly.
Yeah.
And when we can be aware of what's going on and we can make it explicit and something that we can hold out to somebody else or to God, it becomes manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got back, as you know, it's funny how I tell you things you know for the sake of our audience, but I just got back from teaching a retreat for a church staff where the lead pastor had a regrettable failure. He's gone. The staff have been without a primary leader for 6 months now. They're not sure how long it's going to be. And I noticed in the room, because I taught them the 4 spaces, I noticed in the room how much they got calm when I told them that if they spend 90% of their time managing first space, the space in me, that's how they can help others. Because I think they came into the retreat feeling a bit out of control and then realizing, well, I can manage myself.
Yeah.
It gave them something to do, I think, in all this ambiguity.
Yes.
So I think what we're also saying to our audience is if you can learn to notice what's going on in you, then I don't want to say it doesn't matter what's happening around you, because of course you get affected, but it does increase your capacity to connect and to walk into difficult situations.
And for your own reactivity to be more manageable, which does impact the other spaces, as we'll talk about.
Right. Everyone's worked for a person that's just very well, and that you can come to them anxious and they can take it. Like that's like the ultimate boss. So as we go through the 4 spaces, we spend most of the time on the first space because it's the one space you can do the most about.
So what would we say for someone who's never thought about first space? I've worked even with some therapists that you just get so into being with the other people that sometimes you forget to check in with yourself, So this is for every field.
Yeah.
But if you have the tendency to not know what's going on inside of you, a first step, what have you found? It's a good first step.
And I also work, like you work with therapists, and then I work with like type A driven leaders that would say, I'm too busy for that nonsense.
Yes.
And then I always say, well, let's ask your staff if they'd like you to work on it, because if you're not aware, you tend to be bleeding out. I think the people that I work with, like these type A driven people, they're just out of practice and they're surprised that 1 or 2 minutes can change everything.
Yeah.
So I usually encourage them, I encourage them to do 2 things. One is just take 1 minute before you enter. Like even at this retreat, that was the homework I gave for one leader. You know this meeting's coming up. You know it's going to be anxiety producing. Take a minute before you walk in the room. Tend to yourself. The other advice I give people is to get good at debrief. If you're not aware in the moment, looking back, I definitely did that with our kids, I think, where I'd get caught up in frustration in the moment, but then I could look back later and look at it and say, oh, I was not my best. I was spreading anxiety. I wasn't helping anybody. What would you say?
Yeah. I think taking 30 seconds to a minute to just allow yourself to take a deep breath and do a body scan, whether you notice anything or not, just practicing to be attuned. What is going on in me? What do I notice? Do I have a racing heart? Do I have room in me? Am I tight? And then just taking a moment I encourage people to breathe in for 4 and out for 8, because on the exhale, we can breathe out room, into ourselves, and there's a settling that can come.
I do feel like every time you talk about breathing, the exhale gets longer. Like at some point we're going to die.
So now you're going to breathe in for 2 and out for 25.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So basically the first space, the space in me, this is the space we spend most of our time helping people with, because you can only take responsibility for yourself. One of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. And if you can walk into a space having managed yourself, you're less likely to spread and catch anxiety and actually be a helpful person. Let's go to the second space, the space between me and the other. It's crazy, particularly in like family relationships, how quickly anxiety can spread like between like parents and kids, spouses. What do you have to say to us about that?
I mean, that was my example, right? Of that second space is if things are not well, or if we perceive that things are not well, instead of just being curious about it, we're so quick to make assumptions or judge the other, or in some cases, judge ourselves.
Yeah.
And it just can continue to either spread the reactivity inward or outward, and both matter. And that if we could just become a student of what's going on in this space in between, which breeds curiosity and assesses kind of what we're learning or what we're seeing. It helps us, it just helps slow ourselves down.
Yeah. And so people tend to go one of two ways in second space anxiety. They tend to enmesh, which both of us are prone to do. That means that if a loved one is anxious, you just get sympathetically anxious. Kind of like a tuning fork has a sympathetic resonancy. You just catch the anxiety. That's enmeshment, or codependency, it might be called. But then others like get distant and detached. And so if somebody's anxious, you might have noticed someone else be like, that's a you problem or something like that. But we are prone to enmeshment with each other, with our kids. So what might be some questions or helpful ways we can get back to being well?
Yeah, I think taking a moment to asking, just being able to notice, like, where is the anxiety starting? Who's starting it, what started it, and then who's catching it, can be a good one. And then the other one is just thinking through when we don't know, it's the questions of, am I caring right now in this, or am I trying to carry something that's not mine?
Yeah.
So what's mine in this? What's theirs in this? What's God's in this space in between can be super helpful just to ask ourselves even in the moment.
Yeah, just to detangle. Yeah, so second space anxiety, the space between me and the other. That brings us to our favorite space, the third space, the space inside the other. The way we would summarize that is anytime your brain is in someone else's brain. And again, we are both prone to this. We tend to live in other people's brain. But there are two ways. Sometimes you're worried about someone else. Like when I was in high school and I would try to talk to this girl and try to make her laugh, and it went badly. Then she would walk away laughing with her friends and my brain went with her. Right? Like,
assuming that she's talking about you.
What does she think? What is she telling her friends? But I couldn't relax because my brain had left my body. Very teenage thing to do.
Very teenage thing to do.
Yeah. But then the other side is sometimes it's not that you're worried about what someone else thinks. Sometimes you're irritated at someone. And so it's not like, what are they thinking? It's more like, what were they thinking?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember one time I was anxious about a friendship. And when you're anxious about a friendship, and if for those of us who are more prone to enmeshment, or more anxious attachment in conflict, you're trying to read signs everywhere just to figure out, are we okay?
Are we okay with each other? Yeah.
Especially when things happen outside of you, that impact the friendship.
Yeah.
So anyway, I actually was wondering if this person was okay with me and then with our whole family. And a text came and I looked at the number of emojis that this person put in the text. And from that made meaning, because personally put 4 emojis instead of 5, and our family has 5 members in it. And I made meaning, and honestly...
Were you the missing emoji in your mind?
I mean, I had to figure out, who is this person not okay with in our family? And then I caught myself and I'm am I still in 7th grade?
Right.
Right? Like, am I still that young that I'm looking at emojis to determine the worth and value of a friendship? And I had to laugh. But man, when you're anxious, we like go to the youngest emotional level.
Right.
And it's an important reason to do this good work. Now I can laugh about it, but yeah.
Right. That's crazy. Well, and road rage is probably a very simple example of irritation when you're in some, like, oh, what were you thinking? Learn to drive. Those kinds of things. It's a very angry based third space. You and I have both worked with people who are in a relationship with an addict. And they find themselves, not the addict, but the loved one to the addict, they find themselves trying to worry their way to their loved one's sobriety.
Because this is not easy, right? I mean, the emoji one, that's a little bit of a laugh.
Light, fun one,
that's very light.
Yeah.
That's one we can catch. But when you are with somebody in crisis and it's impacting the emotional health of your entire family, it is eggshell walking.
Yeah.
And being aware of what's going on inside the other and what is yours and what is God's. I think what I love about this, we've described it as this is the holy grail space.
Yeah.
This is, at the end of the day, the space between that person and God, really whether or not they know God or not.
Right.
God knows what's going on inside of them.
Yeah. Yeah, what we tell people is third space is the one space you can't do anything about, and yet it's often the one space you spend the most time in. So if you can learn to notice when your brain's in someone else's brain, when you're thinking about what someone else is thinking about, when you can learn to notice when you are trying to worry or be irritated in your brain so that someone else would change their behavior, just to realize you've crossed into God's domain.
Yes.
And then I when I do my workshops, I tell people pretty bluntly, what somebody else thinks and what someone else thinks of you is none of your business.
Oh, that one that's a hard one to swallow, and it's true.
Until they make it your business by saying something. Like what we encourage people, I used to do this as a pastor. People would say things to me and I would try to read what I thought they really meant. That's third space behavior. I got so much freedom when I just took people at their word, even if they actually didn't mean it. And they were actually meaning something else, it was very freeing to just live in ignorance.
Yeah.
And say, well, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I'm going to believe you rather than try to worry about what you really think.
So good.
Yeah, third space. Okay, the final space is the space between others. I'll just say, back to my chaplaincy days, I feel like this is where I got the most reps, because I was always walking into an existing mood every time I walked into a room. And because I was so-called God's representative, the potential for me to change the room by walking into it was always high. So having to learn how to pay attention to the space I'm entering. And then, of course, on a more fun level, I mean, we've both seen this, because I have been a pastor for so long, people will change their conversation when I walk up to talk to them.
Yes.
Like maybe they're talking about something that isn't exactly, shall we say, Christ-like. And then like God's so-called police officer shows up and I've infected the space. So
yeah, which has been hard, right? Because the temptation is to even, be a chameleon. I always forget how to say that word.
I mean, in the motherland, it's chameleon, but I believe here it's chameleon.
Yeah, I think you're right. Where you just want to be able to change to fit in whatever your environment you're in. I was thinking through, both are true, right? Like that can be really hard in a space where you're known.
Yeah. That
can be really hard in a space where you're not known. Yeah, and trying to enter a space for the first time. And you're watching dynamics to see, how can I belong here?
I mean, it just made me think the classic is the new kid in the existing school. The kid's moved into town, first day of school, all these existing relationships, and he or she has to step in. That's hard.
It's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, as simply as, I feel like, because our boys did sports together. And so some of even our adult friendships were all around that and kind of overlapped between the two of them. And then, in this last year, we've even had to look at new friendships, and walk into new spaces. And that's been interesting and so good.
Right.
But just even observing in that space. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It continues.
So that's the 4 spaces: the space in me, the space between me and the other, the space between the other, inside the others, and the space between others. That 4th space, before we leave that 4th space, it is in some ways the most fun and easy space to notice because you can just show up into any group and simply notice the mood shift when someone walks in the room. It's never about blame, but even when we were in third space and we were talking about maybe it's a powerful personality, maybe it's someone that struggles with profound depression, they end up, right or wrong, holding quite a lot of power in a room where maybe someone's really sad.
Yeah.
And they have every reason to be sad. There's nothing wrong with that they're sad, but the unspoken agreement is if they're sad, we're not allowed to be happy, things like that. So this is really helpful. You can just walk in and notice any space. But as we kind of wrap up, we wanted to give you some tips. And the first one really is the power of noticing. We just teach people that if you notice it, you're less likely to catch it and spread it.
And as we've said before, the best way to start this is in reflection, not in the moment.
Yeah.
So just at the end of a day, just take a moment and notice what was the meeting like, or anything that you knew could have produced some reactivity, or anything that maybe blindsided you, and just reflect back through it to know what patterns did I see and really what was going on in me in it that may have contributed or may have diffused either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to have fun, you can actually do some noticing homework. Like your next staff meeting is usually a fairly safe place to notice, and just pay attention to when someone speaks, does that shut other people down? Like what dynamics are you noticing in a group? And to Lisa's point, what dynamics are you noticing in you as other people behave? That's the amazing thing about anxiety, is how we're all linked. And someone else's behavior can trigger your internal well-being.
It's synergetic.
Yeah, very much. And then another fun part of noticing is you can start to notice in all of these spaces the predictable patterns of behavior. So for example, you've gotten so much better at it, but a predictable pattern of you speaking will be the rise of imposter syndrome. And it's more managed than it used to be.
Yep.
But it's really helpful to know for both of us that this is a predictable pattern.
Right.
Of course, I have them as well. And that way we can help each other, but you can also do that difficult work beforehand to manage it.
A lot of it is having a safe place to name it, right? To have somebody else that you can name it to. We were talking about another simple one is just the little things in your families, right? Noticing that I hate it when empty boxes are left in our cupboard. And it just makes me so mad because I think that we have a box full of crackers and then I go to open it and there's absolutely nothing
in there, just a naked box.
Yes, and it's boxes more than bags because you assume they're full. Cereal, the same way. But a pattern is that instead of me then leaving it in there for somebody else to be disappointed, I just go ahead and empty it, throw it away, and buy new so nobody changes anything.
But also part of the pattern is you then get irritated at one of the kids. I do exactly the same thing. And rather than make that kid go and change their behavior, hey, you're going to come down, don't put the empty box away, I just kind of go, and then throw the box out, thus perpetuating the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is also a great example of why first space is so important, because the moment we stop focusing on our kids leaving empty boxes and we start focusing on our grumpiness and our what we call attempted solutions, now there's potential to change things. Yeah. Okay, so every space has predictable patterns. Our favorite second space predictable pattern is the pattern of trying to get a child out the door for school on time. And again, the temptation is to focus on the kid, but we're encouraging you to notice, well, what are you doing? Like I would notice if one of our kids particularly would sleep in and then maybe hadn't packed their lunch like we had asked them to, I would then anxiously pack their lunch for them and have a little anger fantasy at the same, like, why? But also
it's happening again.
But I noticed that I would also notice, this must mean I'm an incompetent father. It took me a while to find that emotion because oftentimes frustration covers. But when I really dug down and focused on first space, what it came down to, if I was a decent father, my kid by this age would be responsible. Total assumption, total crazy assumption.
Oh, I have those too.
Yeah.
We were just saying today that part of the growth is realizing that kids are going to be kids and our job is to train them, right? So it's going to take quite a while for them to learn.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
But the training is important.
And long-term.
Yeah.
Yes. Predictable pattern in third space, you're probably prone to get in the same people's brains every time.
Mm-hmm.
Some of you are probably getting into everyone's brains. You're really a people pleaser, but for many of us, it's certain people that we spend most of our time worrying about. And then, the fourth space, the space between others, the predictable pattern is, again, if we look at a staff meeting, just pay attention. This could be your homework. Who in the staff says the most words? It's almost always the same people. Who never speaks up unless they're called upon? Who has their own secret meeting after the meeting? These are predictable patterns. So this is the power of anxiety management, is how you can notice these patterns. Now, we haven't gotten in this episode to, okay, how do you dissolve the patterns? But just noticing them for a while will really help you be well.
I've had a couple clients that I've been working with that have opened my eyes to another thing you can bring into this. And when we do the 4 spaces, and the way I do the 4 spaces, we draw stick figures, and then there's a red dot, like one color. If the color blue is me, and the color purple is somebody else. So first space is a red dot, kind of at the heart of me. Second space would be a red dot in between the blue stick figure and the purple stick figure.
Yeah.
Third space would be a red dot in the purple,
inside the other.
Inside the other. And then fourth space would be the blue figure, me, watching a red figure, a purple figure, a yellow figure, and then the red dots representing the spaces, the reactivity, and between them.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple people say, man, what if I could imagine that God's hand is carrying kind of a cushion underneath the red dot in all of those spaces, that it's not just reactivity, but it is a reactivity being held, helps them remember God's presence amidst what's going on.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of people do artwork around it, journal it out more, and it's been impactful for me to hear. And now I envision it. This thing that's going on, it's not just on my own, I make assumptions.
Yeah.
But if God's also holding it, if God is also present, that relieves my need to make assumptions because it's not all on me.
I think it's a great way to wrap up today. Just the simple idea that reactivity displaces your awareness of God's presence, or another way to say it is it disconnects us from awareness of God's presence. Of course, it does not disconnect us from God, but it does disconnect us from awareness of God.
Yes.
And your clients, just picturing God's hands holding that anxiety, is such a simple way to invite you to relax into God's presence. So obviously the candle is already lit, but we're going to close the episode by just inviting you, is there a particular space that you're anxious about? Are you torn up? Are you really worried about someone else? Are you noticing a pattern between you and another? Do you not know what to do when someone misbehaves in a group and everyone kind of gets awkward? These are the spaces where God is already sovereign. And so just the final invitation as we wrap up today, to relax into God's presence. You can pray right now to invite God into that, invite your awareness of God into that. And then if you want some advanced work, you can open up your calendar, particularly if it's like on a phone, and just write a little reminder. Maybe you've got a staff meeting coming up. Maybe you've got a difficult situation coming up. And we have just found that helpful just to write, God is already there. So if the calendar event says staff meeting, then we just add the phrase, God is already there, to the calendar event. And then just a minute or two before you walk into that room, just pause, relax into God's presence, and see what difference it makes. It may not make the situation easier, but it probably will deepen your capacity to manage it. Okay, that's the 4 spaces. Any final words?
I think it's a beautiful way to end.
Okay, we've got some fantastic guests coming up we're really pumped about. We look forward to next time.